Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ambassador, Assalamu alaikum, Shao Hao, I hope my Chinese is not too bad, and good afternoon. As you can see, maybe from the title, I'm going to focus a lot on the strategic partnership between UAE and China and where it can lead to. So I'm an economist, and my focus is going to be on economic and financial matters. And in the title, I'm focusing on the fact that we're both facing a changing global economic geography with many challenges. So 3 items on my agenda. I'll want to talk a little bit about the past, but only because it's interesting for the future and how we build on it. So that a changing global economic geography, we have to learn some lessons from it. There's a new world order that is emerging. And 3, the most important part, is how do we work together? And this is in the context of what I call the UAE's economic diversification 2.0, where China can be a comprehensive strategic partner. These are what is agreed between the UAE and China. His Excellency, the Ambassador, already mentioned the fact that November is the 40th anniversary of the establishment of the diplomatic relations. And those diplomatic relations have evolved. You've had high-level visits, both by Sheikh Zayed, President Xi, and recently His Highness Sheikh Mohammed. Importantly, we now have a focus increasingly on economic cooperation, along with cultural, educational, and technological cooperation. All 3 will play an important role. And we have a number of bilateral trade agreements, and now we have a number of about 148 agreements between the UAE and China. And for China, UAE is going to be part of the digital Silk Road. I won't go back to the old Silk Road. That is behind us. What matters is how we move forward. So how has the world changed? If you look at global economic geography, and this is over 40 years, from 1984 to 2004, I just want you to look at the share of China in global GDP, going from 2.7% in '84 to 8.2%, and now to close to 20% of global GDP. That's a massive transformation of global economic geography, driven by China. And if you look at the BRICS, they now account for 35% of global economic activity. So China, and increasingly Asia, are driving the global economy. And if you look at trade, global trade rapidly expanded with globalization. And if you look at China's share of global trade after WTO, it goes from 6% to 12%, doubling over the space of 20 years. And that is likely to continue given China's role in the global economy. And for us, Asia and China are the dominant trade partner. And I'll come back to some of the numbers that His Excellency has mentioned. This is a snapshot of some of the numbers that should interest you. There are now some 400,000 Chinese citizens established here, some close to 15,000 Chinese companies. There were only 7,000 residents, Chinese residents, in the year 2000. So if you look at the massive increase, it is tremendous over a very short period of time, both in terms of UAE investment flows into China, but also Chinese investment flows into the UAE. In terms of tourism and education, you've had 1.2 million Chinese visitors back in '23. You have 210 flights every month. And you now have Chinese schools, and you have the Confucius Institute. Why are these important? Because eventually, Chinese is going to have to enter our curriculum. We're going to learn not only about technology, but we also have to speak the language and understand the culture. Much of our culture has been Western-oriented. In the future, it's going to be increasingly Asian and Chinese-oriented, and we need to prepare ourselves for that. The UAE is already China's largest export market and the largest non-oil trading partner in the whole MENA region. And in 2020, China replaced the EU as the GCC's largest trading partner. So what you're seeing is a big shift away from Europe, United States, towards Asia and emerging Asia and China. And if you look at the bottom, China's exports to the Middle East, some of the fastest growing is to the UAE. And of course, a lot of the exports that come to China, from China into the UAE, are re-exported by UAE because it has very performing transport and logistics. And China's imports from the Middle East are also growing, and they're now going beyond oil. If you look at the UAE's exports, and I want you to focus a little bit on this, obviously, petroleum, oil and gas is dominant. But the UAE is also diversifying its exports. So if you look at non-oil, changing very rapidly. And if you look on the right-hand side, who our main partners are, in red you'll see it is mainly the Arab countries as well as Asia. So again, this shift is away from Europe, United States, and more towards this region of the world and towards China and Asia. And increasingly, and this is important for our future, the dependence on oil and gas of the Middle East is going to continue for the foreseeable future. We are the lowest cost producer of oil in the world. But increasingly, if you look at the bottom, you look at the energy investments, they're moving increasingly into clean energy or renewable energy. And China is the leading investor in the world for clean energy. It has a comparative advantage already in solar, wind, and batteries. What does that mean? It means that it's going to be a partner for the UAE as the UAE goes into sustainable, clean, and renewable energy. This one is the most important, one of the most important of all slides. It talks about economic complexity. What do we mean by economic complexity? It's one thing to take oil and gas out of the ground and export it. But what you really want to look at is value added. How complex are the products that you export? And you'll see at the top, the 3 countries with the most complex products, things like aircraft, phones, etc., which require a lot of complex work, are Japan, Switzerland, and South Korea. And I want you to look at where China was and where it is now. Look at the rapid growth and the complexity of products that China exports. Those goes beyond your phones and others. It's into electric vehicles now across the board. Look how rapidly that increased. UAE is gradually increasing the complexity of its products. But the most important line of them all is Vietnam. Look at where Vietnam was in terms of complexity of products and where it is now. Rapid increase. What does that mean? Fundamentally, Vietnam has partnered with China, and China is making Vietnamese products more complex. So as you partner with China, you go into global supply chains which are more and more complex, demanding more skills, more investment in technology. So in the future, if I forecast, as UAE becomes more integrated into China, manufacturing industry and new technology will be rapidly increasing the complexity of our products. But that is a little bit of the past. We're now facing a very changed world, and I've just put in the slide some of the challenges we both face. There's a shift in global economic geography, but we're also living a period of trade and tech wars and what's being called China decoupling. This could eventually lead to a Cold War, which will mean deterioration of trade, reorientation of supply chains and value chains across the world. You also have a period of increased defense spending. Increased defense spending comes at the expense of investment for climate change and the energy transition and economic development. So those are challenges we were going to have to face. And importantly, this is a period both of climate change, which we have to address, and at the same time, you got rapid technological change. So we're both facing that. So the question is, how do we deal with that together? The UAE is what I call a falcon economy. If you look at the green part, the first part, it's what I call economic diversification 1.0. You had the oil, you created special economic zones and free zones. This allowed for the growth of tourism, tremendously performing infrastructure. But that is very much the past. We've done all that. You now have to think of economic diversification 2.0. I use the term falcon to remind you of the tiger economies in Asia. And the idea really is that, as paradoxical as it can seem, the decoupling of Europe and the United States away from China is a big opportunity for us. The GCC countries and the UAE, in my view, are going to emerge as middle powers, benefiting from both sides. And what it'll mean is that we're going to have to increasingly go into new technologies, which is what the UAE is focusing on. Digitalization, fintech, DeFi, space, AI, and transversal technologies. And I'll talk about them a little bit. But also one of the things that's happening in the UAE and other GCC countries, but mainly led by the UAE, is it's becoming much more regional in terms of its approach, what I call regionalized globalization. The UAE is increasingly integrating other economies of the region into its economy, so it's making them globalized. So economic diversification 2.0 will see stronger Chinese partnership between the UAE and China. Already, China was important in the initial phase of diversification, building infrastructure, ports, airports, and other facilities. But now, I think, with a reorientation of global supply chains, we have an important possibility of UAE becoming the entry point into the Arab world and the Middle East, but also into the growth areas in Africa. That's what's promising. The third part is, I think, the rapid growth in services. Services trade is growing much faster than goods trade. And that means you're going to have to invest much more in digital infrastructure. And finally, I think one of the most promising areas is that the UAE can emerge and become a global center both for old energy, oil and gas, but also for new energy, solar power, hydrogen, and the rest. This is unique. No other region or country in the world is focusing on that. So if you think of what the comprehensive strategic partnership can mean, there are bilateral building blocks for the partnerships, and there are multilateral regional building blocks for the partnership. Both of those are important. On the left-hand side, the bilateral means that eventually you're going to have a free trade agreement, or a CEPA, as the UAE calls them, a comprehensive economic partnership. But eventually, the GCC countries were going to have to move towards a free trade agreement with China. It's been under negotiation for 20 years. Many things have intervened to prevent that, but it could be on the horizon. Then you have the Belt and Road, you have the BRICS opportunities, and lots of investment opportunities across the region. Many countries of the region are going to require reconstruction and redevelopment. This is an area of partnership between China and the UAE. If I focus on the banking and financial side, and thank our host, HSBC, for bringing us together in this afternoon. And by the way, if you look at the logo, I didn't sit down some afternoon and took out a paintbrush. This was done by ChatGPT, as all the other logos that you will see. Gives you an idea of the tremendous power. Let me just mention 3 things that I think need to happen. We need to integrate the payments infrastructure between the UAE and Hong Kong, China. HSBC, for example, clears dollars. Standard Chartered clears euro in Hong Kong, as well as yuan. We need to integrate the payments infrastructure. As our trade grows between the UAE and China, we're going to have to use the renminbi and the yuan for financing a lot of trade. We'll need the payments infrastructure to be integrated. And eventually, you're going to have to think of the petro-yuan for financing a lot of the oil trade. Keep the price in dollars, but have the clearing and settlement be done in yuan. We're also going to have a lot of cross-listings. Your Excellency mentioned some of them. We're going to have to cross-list companies from the region and the UAE into Shanghai, Hong Kong, and have Chinese companies get listed here, along with ETFs, funds, and the like. And the sovereign wealth funds have an important role to play. If you look at where the Gulf sovereign wealth funds are investing, they're increasingly being focused on investment in the local economies, as should be. We need to create the jobs. We need to invest in local sectors, infrastructure, and the rest. But the other part is international investment. And increasingly what we're seeing is that the sovereign wealth funds of the region are shifting towards Asia and towards China. So there will be a pivot towards Asia in terms of investments. So the Gulf Falcon markets, as I like to call them, starting with AGGM, have become mature. You've got the legal infrastructure, legal and regulatory infrastructure. So you can finance the new economy and digitalization. You can finance the global new energy map. And this is going to be extremely promising because at the moment, there is no global financial center focused on financing new energy, solar, wind, batteries, and the rest. This is an enormous opportunity for the UAE to become the global center for renewable energy finance, and in partnership with China, which has the technology. But we're going to have to finance also structural change across the region. We're going to have to finance reconstruction and development, redevelopment across the region. Regionalized globalization will also have to be financed. 2 quick slides. I won't have time to go through them, but they'll talk about some of the deals we already have, both in terms of Dubai, China investments, and also, in particular, this one, where China is now increasingly investing in renewable energy in the region. And one particular area, we all know about solar power, we know about solar PV, we know China has an advantage, and there's going to be a plant here. But more important is to look forward a little bit. We're going to have to address climate change, and that has 2 aspects. Climate change risk mitigation, but also adaptation to climate change. What we mean by adaptation is that we're already beyond 2 degrees increase in temperatures in the region. We're heading towards 3. So you're going to have to adapt to it. We're already seeing droughts, wind, rain coming in enormous quantities. You're going to have to retrofit a lot of the infrastructure that we have. So climate risk adaptation is going to be an enormous opportunity for the region, around $1.3 trillion, which will need to be invested. So We've got the markets, we have access to the technology, we can do that together. Three areas at the bottom where I think these are exportable technologies from the region, and in particular from the UAE. One is desalination. We've been doing it for more than 40 years. District cooling. What you have here is not air conditioning units hanging out of the windows, but cooling coming through power plants. And the third is desert agriculture. Those are three exportable technologies to the rest of the world that needs them. And if you look at China's investments in the UAE renewable energy market, they're rapidly expanding. And it is across the board, including into electric vehicles. The UAE, of course, is looking towards electrifying its whole transport system. So eventually, it's not only going to be flying taxis. Much of our transport system from now to 2030 is going to be gradually converted into electric vehicles. And here again, China is in the forefront in terms of the technology, in terms of batteries, and its ability to export the technology. This is one of the big differences. They're not asking you to buy the products. They will co-invest with you. Several other areas I will quickly go through. One is data centers. As you increasingly use AI and other modern technologies, you're increasingly dependent on having performing data centers which require electricity. We're privileged in being able to have solar power-based data centers. And so in the future, I think the UAE will be a major center for showing how you can use and develop green data centers. One other area, and this obviously concerns AI, Abu Dhabi hosts G42. And of course, there's been a lot of pressure on access and use of AI. For the UAE, it has a neutral stance. We are open to using AI technologies from across the world. We don't need to pick sides, so we can be neutral from that point of view. But I think we need to move forward and have a technology institute set up so that we can teach our current and future generations about AI, digital, and the rest. And the final one, and this is going way beyond, this is aerospace. The UAE is going to be investing in aerospace technology, and as I understand it, in Al Ain. That is one part. Why do you want to go into aerospace? You want to go into aerospace because for the UAE as a trading nation, you already have land, sea, and air. Right? You've got Etihad Airlines, Emirates Airlines, and all the rest. We already have that. And our ports and airports and land and railroad are now integrated. But the future is not there. It is there, yes, for getting into the rest of the Middle East, Africa, and all the rest. But increasingly, everything that we do on Earth is being controlled by satellites in space. And if I don't protect my space assets, I won't be able to protect my digital assets on the ground. When you buy an electric vehicle, you're not buying a piece of equipment. You're really buying a piece of software incorporated into a piece of equipment. And if I can control the software, I can prevent you from using that piece of equipment. And the same is true for all telecoms, power, and the rest. So I am an advocate of doing two things. Not only that you need to invest in space technologies, I would advocate that we should have a space port in the UAE. That is the ability to launch satellites and rockets here, just like you have Cape Canaveral and you have other space ports across the world. And that would be in cooperation under the strategic partnership with China. So those are some of the building blocks, I think, for the future. And they rely on technology, on finance, and really having a lot of ambition. I'm Lebanese. I'm not Emirati citizen, but I've been here 18 years, and I'm an economist. And what I care about is not only having the vision, but also the willingness to make it happen. And this is one of the rare countries in the world where you have that. And I think now we have an enormous opportunity moving forward to partner with China, which is offering it us. So, and I'm not talking politics right now, I'm an economist. If the rest of the world wants to decouple, let them decouple. We can build our own future, and I think those are some of the areas in there. That's the logo for a comprehensive strategic partnership, and that's also ChatGPT. Thank you.